So thanks, Mike, for asking me to come up. And it's most people don't really know that much about me, and mainly that I really don't like to talk a lot. It's like I'm a pretty quiet guy. But when it talks about, when it comes to bees, I don't know, something comes out in me, so I start talking about them. And my personal journey for on beekeeping, I began keeping bees back in '78 when I moved from New Orleans to the North Shore, and I got my first beehive. And I didn't know anything about it. I got some bees and they were in the yard, and that pretty much was the extent of my beekeeping knowledge. I didn't know anything except there's some bees back there. And I really
I'm gonna have to get you a stool, man.
I really didn't start to understand bees, or that there was something to understand about bees, until I started going to Julian Lane's class, where unfortunately I met Mike Barrett. And so and that was like, I don't know, 12 years ago, Mike, 13 years ago, something like that. Yeah, it's been a while. And Julian actually was the one who introduced me to the science, or to an understanding of bees. And like Mike said, you can keep bees however the heck you want. You don't have to know anything. I mean, I did it for years. Didn't know anything. I had bees, and every once in a while I get honey off them. It was good. And that's the extent of what I wanted to do, and it worked. It worked for me. And if that's all you want, that's all you need to do. I always do say, nobody should dictate to you how you should keep your bees. You know, you can listen to a lot of people, but you need to formulate your own idea of how you want to keep bees, what you want from your bees, what you want to do for the bees. You have to come up with your own philosophy on bees. And for me, the journey is still ongoing for me. You never stop learning, because there's always something else that you see that you never looked at in the same way. And when I started to listen to what Julian was saying, it was mostly concerning splitting beehives, and that's where I started paying attention to what he had to say, because he said, "What? You split a beehive? What is that?" And I remember sitting in the class, and me and Wreck-It Ralph, we used to sit next to the other. And Mike didn't want to sit by us, so he'd sit on the other side. And me and Ralph, we talked, man, I ain't gonna do that. That's too much work. I ain't gonna do that. All right? And we didn't do it. And so our hive just limped along. They weren't doing anything. They were just okay. But for some reason, I don't know what happened, and I decided I'm gonna go into. I remember the first time I saw a swarm cell. I said, "Oh, what's that?" And in the class, Jules said, "If you get these things in there, you gotta squish them off." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I squished them. I said, "Man, that's pretty cool. I killed a queen." And it's like the first time. And then I'm thinking, now looking back, I said, "Man, why did I do that?" It's like you as you go, you begin to think for yourself and to have an understanding of bee behavior. And I think that's like the real key to becoming a beekeeper, is to learn bee behavior. If you can understand how bees behave, their cycles, that's when the whole world opens up for you. And that's what happened for me. What happened, how I was like forced into it, was in 2016 when so the monks asked me to keep bees for them. I was volunteering up there, and one of the junior monks said, "I want to do bees, would you help me?" So I helped him. He left, and so we had a few hives, and I said, "Well, I'll keep on doing it." And we grew those hives until we had probably about 25 of them. And in 2016, when the flood came at Gabby, it washed everything away. And so at that point, I said, "Well, can we just chuck it, or just what are we gonna do?" So I said, "Well, I really liked it, And I said, well, I'm gonna go ahead and do it. And so how I did it was I learned how to do cutouts. That's what I did. I grew our hives at the Abbey from swarms and cutouts, and then from splits as well. But it was primarily from cutouts, learning how to do cutouts. And how I learned to do cutouts was watching JP, the bee man. He was the first guy on YouTube I started watching. I said, man, that's like slick as could be. I said, I think I can do that. And I do have a background in carpentry, and so I do know about construction, how things are built. So that does help. But I've probably done, I don't know, 300, 400 removals over the years that I've done it. So I've really got a lot of experience in that area. But mostly what it's taught me is behavior, what I observe from the bees in the wild, because my beekeeping prowess is like zero. I don't do anything with our bees. Once I set the bees up out in the yards, they're on their own. The only time I go in there is to do splits in the springtime and to pull honey in July. That's it. Other than that, they stay out there. I don't fool with my bees. If they make it, they make it. If they don't, fine with me, because I'm always going to get some more doing splits or whatever, and I'll replace them. And so we had built the hives up to about 200 plus 2 years ago. And it's just me and Charlie working these things, and it's just like, that's stupid. It's too much work. It's just not worth it. So we scaled down to about 150 this year, and the whole idea behind what I want to do up there is just so that I can put honey in the gift shop for them to sell honey all year round. That was the goal I wanted to reach that goal. If we could have honey in that gift shop all year round, that's all I want to do. And so the year we had 200 hives, we produced over 6,000 pounds, about 400 plus gallons. And Charlie and I worked our butts off of that. And it's not so much the processing. The processing is a piece of cake, but it's the gathering of the honey, going out to all the yards, because our yards are spread out. We have 10 yards, and it's about 15-mile radius from the Abbey. So we could, in one day, we could travel 110 miles, go into our different yards. So even though it's just a 15-mile radius, there's a lot, because we have them all the way from Enon to Tallahassee, Avita, and let's see, in west, well, it's just the Abbey. We don't really go west. It's east that we go and south. So it's about a 15-mile radius from the Abbey, and I told Charles, I said, this is too much, it's killing us. I mean, he's older than me, and so we're trying to look at these supers, because we run all deep, our honeys are deep, and we're trying to pull these supers that are weighing 75 to 90 pounds, and it's just brutal. And in July, you're doing this. I said, no, it's crazy. So we cut back. I know that year we had 115 supers, honey supers in the honey house. This year we only had, I think it was 90 or 95, and we did about 300 gallons of honey is what we processed. So that's about, it's a good, it was a lot more manageable. It was easier. We did have a couple of young bucks that helped us to carry the load, but it was still, it's still a chore. I think like 50 hives is like ideal. One person can work 50 hives, really. The problem that you're going to run into is, of course, the processing and how you decide you're going to process. Are you going to store it in buckets, 5-gallon buckets? You're going to store it in drums. There's all these things you have to think about when you go to processing your honey. It's one thing to have the hives, but then what are you going to do with the honey that comes out of that hive? What are you going to do with that surplus honey? And I don't talk about keeping bees. because I don't keep bees. I go out there and I collect my rent, and that's what I do. And I do splits, but I do like doing my splits, and I don't recommend the way I do splits, but my most favorite way is using swarm cells, but it's a very risky way of doing it. But the easiest way, like Mike does, is you drop in queen cells in there. You graft your queens and you put them in. That's the easy way. I like letting my bees make their own queens, and it's still not one queen that's making my whole hives everything the same. I like a lot of different types of genetics. So I think for me, since all of our hives are Heinz 57, they're mutt hives anyway. It's a good way to keep those genetics going. That's just my way of thinking. Plus, it's my laziness too. Because if I get a bunch of swarm cells, I'm going to just drop them into the next box and move on. I'm still the theory is still the same as what Mike's doing, but I'm using swarm cells instead of dropping in a queen cell that he's grafted. So anyway, what I was asked to do tonight was to talk about removals, and I think that really is what I know most about is doing removals. Now I do know a little bit about processing and equipment for processing, because I did have to come up with the way that we do it at the Abbey. And when you move from being just a hobby beekeeper from 10 to 20 hives to move up to that 50, 100, 150 hives, the equipment that you're going to use, even to acquire the boxes, bring the boxes into your honey house, and then once they're in the honey house, how you process the honey, the frames in there, that is it's a science. And efficiency is always what you want to do. You want to expend the least amount of energy to create the most amount of work for the least amount of effort put into it. And so the process that I came up with is I have a Dakota Gunnis uncapper, and it suits my needs. That type of uncapper, it's really fast. We uncap 2 deep supers at a time, and you can do 2 deep supers in about 20 seconds, front, top, and bottom. It comes out of it comes out of the uncapper, goes through the conveyor, it comes out, and you need 2 people at the other end. You have 2 people feeding, 2 people at the other end, and then what we do, 2 years ago, I had an uncapping tank built where we can load 50 frames into our uncapping tank. It'll drain most of 50% of the honey coming off of those comb, off the frames. It'll go into that tank, and then we take from the tank, we load up the extractor, and it's a 48 frame man-leg extractor. And we just spin the honey, and then once we pull once it spins out, we throw it right back into the supers. So since it's a 48 frame extractor, we run 5 boxes. 5 boxes is a run. You have 50 frames, because mine are 10 frame boxes. And we run 5 boxes, so that's how every run is 5 boxes. So when we bring in our honey supers from the field, we stack them on dollies with a tray underneath them in 5s. And we roll these stacks into right by our uncapper. We roll it through. When those are pulled out, that row of boxes goes to the extractor. When it comes out the extractor, they go right back into those boxes, and then all that stuff goes out on the back porch for the bees to eat. We did last year, I said we did 4,000. We did 4,000 pounds in about 6 hours. And when we run that stuff, my uncapping machine makes these really fine pieces of wax, because the uncapper drags a chain across the top of the super, and as it's dragging the chain across it, it's just ripping the cappings off of them. And you set you can set the chains so that you get a very uniform, very much like a knife uncapper, but it tears up the edges a little bit, but the bees don't have any trouble fixing that stuff. And so in the honey wax slush that's in there, you get a lot of wax. I don't care about that because I'm pumping all of my honey wax sludge into my drums, and that's why we can process so much honey so fast, is that the honey goes from our pump into the drums. We don't try to filter it, clean it up at all. We just want to get it off of the frames and into the drum. That's what I'm focusing on. And then I'll wait a week, I'll go back in there, and I'll skim all of that wax off, because it all comes up to the top. I'll skim all that off, and then I'll throw all that mix into a honey wax separator. Just throw that in there. It's just another centrifuge, and it spins and separates the honey and the wax. And then I get my dry wax, and the rest of the honey comes out of it. So I use the processing time just to move honey from the comb into our drums. And then I'll come back, and it generally takes me 2 days, 3 days to do all that uncapping, but I do that by myself. But while I have all the help, we just run honey. And it works very, very well for our operation. And I store everything in drums, so even if it's crystallized, in fact, I'm getting ready to make a video on that, how I deal with the decrystallizing drums of honey. When I do the video on that, you'll see that. But it's a very simple method that I use, and you have to come up with your method. And there is not a lot of information out there once you start getting past hobby beekeeping, because the market isn't there for those individuals. The market's there for the commercial guys and the hobbyists, but the intermediate guy, you got to figure it out on your own how you want to do it. And pretty much for my whole beekeeping career, I've been figuring it out as I go. But that's the fun part, you know, figuring out. And doing cutouts, it's like you're figuring out, even though I've done so many, each one is different in its own way. But I've done so many in so many different scenarios of it, I haven't seen anything new other than, you know, how they build it, where they build it. That's always challenging. So, any questions? Is it boring? So the
one question, Jeff.
Yeah.
On your
Tommy, no.
I'm just curious. On your decapper, do you have, like, when you have a little concave part, or does it?
That's the beauty about a chain uncapper, as opposed to a knife, because a knife is only going to cut straight.
Right.
But a chain, because it's about 1.5 inch chain, and that chain, it's dragging. So it doesn't matter if your comb is flat or if it's valley, peak, because that chain, if it's valley, that chain drags down into that valley and rips off, and that's why you never get.
It's not spinning; it's dragging.
It's spinning, yeah, it's spinning. But as it's spinning, it's basically taking that chain, throwing it over the roller, and then dragging it across and throwing it over again. That's how it's. That's how I say dragging across the. It's not drag. It is dragging, but in a very fast way, it's dragging. So and so your comb, when you use a knife, the edges of the comb are very crisp, sharp, you know, and the bees don't have to do a lot of work to get that out. And so mine they're like raggedy because it's been pulled off of there in a sense. But I'm telling you, the bees don't have any problem drawing that, fixing it and drawing it out. And one of how I do it is all of our honey supers, once we finish uncapping and putting the boxes out on the back porch, they stay out there for about They should only stay out there for like 2 weeks, but sometimes they stay out there for 2 months. And eventually, I store mine in a, it was an old peacock pen, so it's huge. It's probably about 60 foot long and 30 foot wide, and I stack all those supers with drawn comb out there, and it's got hog wire all the way around it, so big varmints can't get in, but bees and other stuff, they can get in there. That's okay. And I stack them in there for the summer and for the winter, and as long as, and this is the important part, as long as there's no brood in there or significant amount of pollen in there, the moths won't get it. They will not get it. So I store mine outside, and I don't have any problem as long as I don't have any brood in there. So when we're pulling our frames out of the extractor and putting them back into the boxes, we're also separating them out if they had brood laid in them or if there was pollen. Because those I'll put to the side, and I'll strip those out and melt that wax down and clean up the foundation and then re-wax them. Because I have never been able to save those frames to the following spring to use them, because the moths will always get them, always get them.
So you don't use queen excluders, and that's why you kind of have to separate that out
Right.
later?
So I don't use queen excluders because that would one, mean another piece of equipment that you gotta deal with.
Right.
And to me, a queen excluder is more trouble for the bees as well. They work, and if I was just a hobbyist, I probably would put them in there. But for my operation, it's not a fit for me. And I tried it, and I still had queens going up there laying in the third super. So I said, man, that's crazy. So that's another reason why I use all deets, because if my queen does go up in there and lay, I'll just pull any frames that have brood in it, and I'll just pull a frame from the bottom box of those 2 outside frames. They're gonna all be honey, and I'll just take those and drop the brood back into that. And when you